You're watching Viewpoint with the Chief Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, and tonight we're going to move on now to the subject of fishing in Gibraltar waters. If we return to our poll results, we see that a very significant majority of respondents think that commercial fishing in local waters should be properly regulated with a licensing system. 47.5% said yes, compared to 27.5% who said no. Mr Picardo, you've introduced maritime regulations and a licence system for many aspects of fishing, but not for commercial fishing. Are you afraid of the consequences with the Spanish fishermen who come here very regularly with nets?
Well, we haven't just introduced the maritime regulations that we've already enacted. We've also changed the Nature Protection Act to potentially allow for fishing with nets to be, as a commercial opportunity, regulated and licensed. That is something which my government has done and which has not been done before. In fact, the situation that we were dealing with was a situation where there was an agreement that allowed people to act contrary to the law of Gibraltar, and people know the arguments that both parties have deployed in respect of that. We have contemplated this issue of allowing fishing with nets, and that's why we've opened the door in the legislation. It's something which we're looking at in detail, and it's something which may happen during the lifetime of this Parliament. It would, in my view, be something which could only happen if people were to accept licenses or to accept permits for the purposes of being authorised to fish with nets, given that that is at the moment contrary to a primary piece of legislation, the Nature Protection Act.
Illegal but not enforced. Fishing with nets, commercial fishing.
Well, absolutely. Well, absolutely. And in relation to that, let me just read from the GSLP manifesto. It says, "We do not believe it is right to allow illegal fishing in our waters, and we will stop this immediately. We'll ensure that the ban on the use of drift nets and other nets is enforced without political interference." Now, it's a very categorical assurance that the GSLP Liberals made at the last elections that they would stop illegal fishing, and they haven't. It continues. But look, I'm glad the government now is looking at the introduction of legislation in order to allow for regulated fishing with nets. I've been calling for the government to do that as the solution to the current impasse for the last 3 years. When I started doing so and I started to call for allowing of EU-compliant nets, Mr Picardo used to criticise me and say, well, EU-compliant nets is just simply a euphemism for Spanish nets. Well, look, the government is now planning to do exactly the same. But he has said something which is very, very interesting and really lies at the heart of the dilemma that the government has. What he has said is people have got to accept the licensing regime. And the problem the government has is that if it dumbs down the law, perhaps dumbing down is not the correct term, but if it allows fishing with nets from a total prohibition that we have now,
in law,
and in law,
not in practice,
and in law, and Spanish fishermen still continue to come in fishing in our waters with non-EU compliant nets or in a manner that breaches our law, he's got a huge problem, because he's back to the situation we're in now, but with a law that he has introduced in order to allow fishing with nets. That's why he's talking about people have got to accept, and I know that he is through intermediaries talking with the cofradías of Algeciras and La Linea in order to get them to accept the government's plans in this respect.
And will they?
I haven't got any of the problems that Danny's referring to. Of course, what he's got is the huge hook onto which the GSD found itself hooked, which was the agreement that they did, which allowed people to come in and fish contrary to our law and not have our law enforced against them.
They continue to come in today.
Well, they continue to come in today, but if you look at what we promised to do, we said that the enforcement would be without political interference. In other words, as you know, Jonathan, there was a political agreement before between politicians and fishermen that said police will not be allowed to interfere or act in keeping with the law. That is not the case today. And I'm very comfortable being in a situation where I can say, well, look, I as Chief Minister of Gibraltar have not entered into any agreement which goes against the rule of law in that way. How are we going forward? Well, we are going forward with engagement, not just with Spanish fishermen, but in particular with people who fish in Gibraltar, understanding in detail what it is that they want to do. John Cortes, who, as you know, was the architect of the 1991 Nature Protection Act, which introduced the ban, said recently in Parliament what we wanted to do and what we are achieving is the replenishment of our stocks. We may not have been able to do it as effectively as we wanted to do it to date, but we are looking to continue to do that in a particular way. And the fishing fraternity here agree with us. Now, Danny says, and he says it's all the time,
Can I
there
have
is
a-
more
can I have a
fishing
go?
now.
I'm going to ask a
there is
question if
more-
you can round up your
There
point,
is more
please.
fishing now than there ever has been before. Well, that's just patently untrue. The agreement that his government entered into allowed for more fishing than actually even went on.
But there is a lot
So-
of fishing. I mean, people see it on a
Indeed.
more or less daily basis.
Absolutely.
And what you're saying is that there was political interference before because Peter Caruana at the time made an agreement that they could come in. Can you categorically state that you have not asked the Commissioner of Police not to arrest anybody?
Absolutely. It would be unconstitutional for me to do so, and I would not go down that road. I'd like you to ask Danny whether he would respect those rules if he became Chief Minister, because it's given indications.
He already laid out his views
He's
last
given
week.
indications
We'll move on.
that he wouldn't.
I have made my position very clear indeed. I just simply don't accept the premise that if you have the laws of Gibraltar being broken on a habitual basis, that the Chief Minister of Gibraltar can just simply wash his hands of the matter, as you seem to be washing
I'm
your
not
hands,
washing my hands of
and
anything.
blaming
Not at all.
and blaming the police and blaming them for lack of enforcement.
So you would direct the police to do something?
No, what I would
You
do,
wouldn't direct the
what I
police?
would do is I would have the Commissioner of Police in my office and I would ask him, look, in the same way
So
as...
you'd give him
in
a
the
telling
same-
off?
well, yes, I would ask him for an
You'd give him a
explanation.
telling off, right.
Have you spoken to the Commissioner of Police? You know that there are Spanish fishermen that come into our waters every single day, breaching our laws with impunity. Have you at the very least
And you
spoken
know
to the
that there-
Commissioner of
you know
Police
that there are people
and asked them,
who-
well, what are
you
you
know- hang on
doing
a minute,
about
hang on a minute.
enforcement?
You
I
were
would have
Minister
expected
for-
that.
You were
You've
Minister
asked
for
him something.
Justice. Did you call the Commissioner of Police in because you saw too many children riding their bikes down Main Street in breach of the law? Did
Well,
you ask him
Let
what
me
the hell
answer,
he was
let
doing
me
about
answer that question.
Go
Well,
on.
let me answer. On many occasions,
Having taken an oath to the rule of law.
On many occasions, I had the chance, because I met the Commissioner of Police every single week in my office. On many occasions, I had a chance to ask the Commissioner of Police, look, I'm a bit concerned about this. What are you doing about this in this particular area? But look, from what you're saying, you haven't even had that conversation,
I'm
and
sorry.
I can't believe
I am sorry.
that a Chief Minister of Gibraltar
Let him
doesn't
respond to
have
that.
that conversation.
No,
Fabian.
I am
it's
sorry.
just not. It's just not
Mr.
credible.
Feetham.
This demonstrates to you what Danny is like. You have asked me a direct question. You said, have you told him not to arrest Spanish fishing
What is
boats?
the explanation
And
he's
he has
provided
now
to you?
said, and he's now said, I can't believe he said he hasn't had that
What is the
conversation.
explanation?
No, I've had conversations with the Commissioner of Police.
And what is the
with
explanation?
senior ranks. I'm not here to be cross-examined by you. I'm answering Jonathan's question. Thank you very much. I've had conversations with the Commissioner of Police and with senior ranks of the Royal Gibraltar Police and with members of the GPA about what the government's concerns are. But we have to respect the independence of the police. Respecting the independence of different bodies within the constitutional setup in Gibraltar is just as important as ensuring that our laws are kept. And
Yeah,
there was
look,
a
David,
system-
look at the
there
situation
was a
as a
system
Mr. Feetham,
where the Minister for Justice and the Chief Minister set out policing priorities with the GPA in consultation during the course of the year. And that is what we are
I've
doing.
got a follow-up question because we did get a lot of questions when we did a viewpoint on fishing. Let me ask a slightly differently phrased question then. Have you suggested to the Commissioner of Police that it would be very difficult for you politically should he arrest any of the Spanish fishermen who come in daily?
Not at all. I haven't had to have that conversation with the Commissioner
Okay,
of Police.
that's a very short
I can't-
answer. I'm sorry, Mr. Feetham, you have made your views on this clear last week,
but
and
he's not
somebody
the
has to have the
lion's
final
share,
say.
but it's up to you.
Yeah, thank you.
You've got the whole hour
We've got
last
John
week.
Chapery on the line who wants to ask a question or make a point about commercial fishing, hopefully. Mr. Chapery, good evening.
Good evening. My point is that the fishing permits, so I'm concerned, they're starting on the 1st of January. I would like to know how many Spaniards have come to Gibraltar to apply for this permit.
Okay, thank you
Thank
for
you.
your question
Thank you.
for the Chief Minister, I assume.
Well, it's not a statistic that I know. I don't know how many have come from Portugal, Spain, or elsewhere, but in all countries of the European Union, there is a system which allows people to come in and apply for permits. And as long as they apply for permits, then they are able, in keeping with the same rules as nationals, to take those permits. And in some instances, even on terms which are different and less favourable than those which apply to
okay.
nationals.
I'm
I have
afraid
a
we have
question.
to move
Well,
on.
I have a question that I've been asking, and I'm going to ask you on public television
You're
yet
gonna have to
again today.
ask it very quickly.
I'm here to answer your questions, not
Under
Danny's.
this regime of regulated fishing with nets, the regime that you are currently considering, will Spanish fishermen have to come to Gibraltar and apply for a license in order to fish with nets?
Okay, that's
or
the
are they just
question.
simply going to, simply going to form part of a list of ships
Okay,
in
that's
the
the question.
Cofradías of Algeciras. and
Mr.
Lisbon.
Feetham,
Can
that's
you
the
answer
question.
that?
Yes, I can. And there are many different ways of producing that permit list or licensing list. We haven't yet determined how we'll do it. I've told you before, you just insist on wanting to ask the same
Okay.
questions over and over again.
So we'll return to the issue,
and you
I'm sure, at
refuse to
some other
answer
point,
what is
Mr.
a matter of
Feetham.
public
We
interest for the
agree to
public.
disagree.
People have now seen that I've answered you.
Okay,
What
if
you
we,
haven't with respect-
Mr.
Well, I have,
Feetham,
with
Mr.
all due
Picardo,
respect.
thank you. If we again return to our results, we've got a few more topics to get through. We asked all 650 people that we polled whether they agree with the siting of the new football stadium up at Europa Point. 42% said no, that they disagree with the new stadium being sited at Europa Point. 36% said they agreed with it being built there. 22% are undecided on the issue. So we're just looking at that graph there. Not a very significant majority, but a majority nevertheless among those polled thought that it would be the wrong place to put the stadium up at Europa Point. However, and I'll go to you first, Mr. Feetham, because this is an issue that you've spoken about at length before. Among those polled, practically no one, just 1%, thought that this would be the most important issue at the next election. Have you overstated it, perhaps?
No, I don't think that I've overstated it, because it is a matter of concern to the opposition, and it is a matter of concern to the public, that it's not the most important issue, because you have employment, you've got power supply, you've got the public finances of Gibraltar, which I hope that we're also going to get to during the course of the debate.
In the next 5 minutes.
You have a situation where you have one of the last open spaces in Gibraltar, an iconic location which is going to be completely and utterly spoilt if the stadium is allowed to go ahead. And Fabian has already made statements publicly that he thinks that this is the only viable alternative. There's no other alternative for the siting of the stadium. Either it's here or presumably it's nowhere at all. And the government's already taken preparatory steps in relation to this, because we know that the government's also incorporated Europa Stadium Limited. So it seems to me that here we have another instance of the government basically paying lip service to, in this case, the DPC, but really, at the end of the day, it's a done deal.
Okay, so a very quick response, if you would, Mr. Picardo.
Again, I think Danny doesn't quite understand what is happening in the process here. I accept that, given that he was a minister in the GSD that had a DPC that was held behind closed doors and simply did what ministers wanted, that he might have a different view. But this has been actually one of the best examples of democracy in action, one of the best examples of what Danny likes to mockingly call the new dawn. We've seen the GFA actually play this completely straight. Even before they made the application to the DPC, they had an exhibition, and they said to the general public, come and tell us what you think of our proposals and our plans before we go to the DPC. Then the DPC really came into its own for the first time, I think, real community participation in an application that could have important consequences for things that people really cared about. And that process is now still ongoing. And the GFA is coming back with revised proposals, and you will see where this goes. But actually, I'm very proud of Gibraltar and the way it's handled the stadium controversy, if we can call it that. I'm very happy with the way the GFA really opened itself up to criticism and to input from the general public. And the result of where the stadium finally is sited and what it looks like will be a full community participation in the future of football in Gibraltar.
Could you provide a short answer for Mike or Michael, who has written in, can you ensure that the petition that was signed by over 7,000 people against building the stadium at Europa Point will be honoured and respected?
Well, I can't say be honoured and respected other than agreeing to do what those 7,000 people will have asked us to do. But I can say it's something which is really being taken into consideration, and the GFA in particular are taking it very seriously.
But look, he talks about all this wonderful process about the DPC and participation from the public, and rightly, of course, there's been participation of the public because there's a lot of concern by the public.
Better than in the old days.
A lot of concern by the public in relation to this project. But days after the first hearing at the DPC, your government incorporated a company, Europa Stadium Limited, with 40,001,000 shares, which you've said 1,000 shares goes to a government-owned company, and the 40 million are intended to be taken up, in answer to question in Parliament, that's what you told me,
yes.
40 million by the GFA.
If the project goes ahead.
This is, but hang on a minute. Aren't you jumping the gun, incorporating a company just days after this wonderful process that you've just described by incorporating this company. That tells me that actually Fabian Picardo is really intent on going ahead, and there's huge concern about Fabian.
We're going to have to keep our points short and brief for the last 10
let me
minutes.
reply. Fabian Picardo cares about housing, health, the economy and employment much more than he cares about the stadium. We've had a public participation process. I'm afraid, Danny, you think that every issue is a golden bullet or silver bullet that's going to destroy the government and Fabian Picardo. I think you need to be a bit more patient and allow the community to express itself and see where we're going. And when the community expresses itself, see how the relevant participants, all as stakeholders, produce a better result.
For possibly Mr. Feetham, if I may. No, Mr. Feetham, if I may, I'm sorry. For possibly the last time tonight, let's return to the issues our poll threw up. We have asked the community what they think, and that's what's guiding this programme. Let's return to the issues that the poll threw up then. 90 minutes is flying by. I'll ask you to be as concise as possible in what remains. These next two subjects, 12.5% of people thought the state of public finances would be the most important issue at the next elections. A very similar number, 12%, thought housing was the most important issue. Let's take housing first, and we'll go to you, Mr. Picardo, as Chief Minister. Hundreds of new homes are coming online soon, to your government's credit, no doubt, but will they be ready before the next election?
Well, some of them will be, not all of them. There's another 1,500 that are being advertised, and we'll shortly be going through the process of marketing them. But of course, housing is like unemployment. If it's an issue that affects your family in some way, then that is the biggest issue in your life, because it causes a big social problem, it causes a problem in the family, it can really make your life a misery if you're not properly housed. And the government has responsibilities there. It needs to step up to be able to ensure that we can help people. And of course, every government tries to help. But are you ready to invest and do things to enable you to assist people timelessly? And I think we've demonstrated that we can. In most other elections in Gibraltar, I think you would have found that housing would have been way up there as the most important issue. 12% is relevant, it's important. There's a lot of work still to be done, but it demonstrates that we've done a lot already.
OK, I'll allow you to respond to that in kind, Mr. Feetham, insofar as we've got a question from Kieran, who is asking about subsidised affordable houses, which can be sold on for profits in excess of £100,000. That's Kieran's figure, but we all have anecdotal evidence of the same. Why have successive governments failed to close the doors for people exploiting what should be affordable housing for short-term gain? So I'll ask you first.
Well,
and
I
then
have
Mr.
to say
Picardo.
it's a bugbear for me, because I don't think it's justified. But unfortunately, you try and close loopholes, and somebody finds another loophole. When I first came over to Gibraltar, it was this question of fixtures and fittings that was a device that was used in order to get round the restrictions that were placed by the then GSLP government on the affordable homes that they built. It's very difficult, I have to say. It's really difficult.
Will you set out to address that in your election manifesto?
Every single government has actually tried to address it. This government has tried to address it in relation to the resale terms that it's imposed in relation to these homes. We tried to do it as well. It's very difficult, but of course, I mean, we continue to try.
Okay, how difficult is it to organise resales in such a way that you do not effectively distort the housing market as what has been happening and probably will continue to happen?
It is difficult. All governments have tried. For example, when we were elected, we were very keen to try and enforce the covenants in respect of Waterport Terraces and other projects of the previous administration, where people had not been resident but were saying to us, well, I've been there for 7 years and I can now sell.
And you forced people to move in, effectively,
and we forced people to move in, or some people even were not allowed to sell for a further period. That's important. I think that demonstrates how serious we were about it. I wish the other party had done so when they were irresponsible. But also, if you sell those properties on a 100% basis to the people who are prepared to buy most of the equity of a property rather than looking at their circumstances, then you also incur the possibility that you're building actually for the richest, those most, not rich, but those with the most disposable income. That's why we resisted that. And we haven't given priority to people who buy 100%. Because, Jonathan, the point is this: if you buy 100%, the underlease gives you an opportunity to sell more quickly than somebody who buys 50%. And we want to build for those who need homes which are affordable, rather than simply for those that can afford them.
And I think that the point that people make on the street, and I've heard it many a time, is that they should be stricter, because there are still plenty of opportunities to buy affordable housing, which is subsidised by the electorate at large, whether you're moving in personally or not. and then is being sold on at a profit, and that individual can move on
That's
up
absolutely
the
right.
ladder,
That's absolutely
and
right.
the affordable housing stock diminishes.
That's absolutely right, and we have to be very careful how
Well,
we do it.
let's hope that both of you put something in your next election manifesto to address that.
Well, it's not so much, I think both of us will agree, it's not so much about the election manifesto, it's about the underleases themselves and making sure that the underleases are complied with. And therefore, if you say it's for owner occupation, if your meter hasn't moved for 7 years, mate, you haven't complied with the obligation to occupy what you bought.
Okay, well, Gavin has been waiting very patiently, so we'll ask you for your question, your viewpoint on housing, Gavin. Can you go again? I think the line was slightly fuzzy there.
Hello. Yes, my question.
I'm afraid you're breaking up, Gavin, so do email in if you've got an opportunity to do so. Otherwise, thank you for trying to get in touch, but I'm afraid we can't hear you. I'm afraid we can't hear you, Gavin, so we're going to have to curtail that call, and we'll move on to public finances. 12.5% thought that will be the most important issue at the next elections. So what do we read from that, Mr Feetham? I'll allow you to take the first stab at that answer.
Well, what it tells is that people are genuinely concerned about the state of public finances, in particular the levels of debt that this government is saddling Gibraltar. Because, look, we're not simply talking about the direct government debt. In other words, whether it's gross debt or net debt of the government. We have a situation here where, since the last election, the government has been transferring government debentures, which rank as government debt, into the Gibraltar Savings Bank. In 2011, there were £27 million of debentures in the Gibraltar Savings Bank. Nowadays, there's more than 800 million. 400 million of which, nearly half, has been transferred into this company, Credit Finance Company Limited, which, in my view, represents the single biggest assault on the transparency of our public finances and the ability of Parliament to scrutinise those public finances in the political history of Gibraltar.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I'll ask you, Mr Picardo, to speak to the figures, perhaps. £65 million more in the kitty. You've brought in £65 million more than you've spent. It was a record budget as far as you're concerned.
Indeed, and if you just look at the numbers as they are today, let me give you some figures which are hot off the press. There's actually £85 million of usable cash reserve in the hand of the government at the moment. The savings bank will likely break the £1 billion deposit record during the course of this financial year or early in the next. And the company that Danny talks about, which is Credit Finance Company Limited, is only a mechanism by which we intend to try and make money to repay the interest that the savings bank requires. We're not using it for absolutely any government project whatsoever. The only aspect of what the government does, which is being paid for by Credit Finance Company Limited, is the commutations of retiring civil servants, which is one of the best businesses you could be in and produces a huge return to the company in order to be able to have capital to repay the savings bank with the interest necessary. You've got to make the money work. Now, Danny cares about credit finance, but he doesn't care about Finnish bonds, he doesn't care about Norwegian bonds, which is what the other half of the deposits in the savings bank are invested in. He doesn't know what's happening politically in Finland and where the bonds will go up or down, what's happening in the equities that the Crown agents invest in. This is one aspect of the investment of the money that depositors put in the savings bank that we're handling ourselves, and it's doing very well. But if you look at the economics of this,
let me just give you a quick, because this is really very important.
I know, and we can invite you both back in January. Gents, we can invite you back both in January.
Quick figure for him to reply to.
Hopefully you can agree that you'll come back.
Of course.
And we can discuss public finances.
It's my turn now to come back on.
Let me tell him.
You can have the final word.
The gross debt is £480 million. £460 million. That's 60 less than it was under the GSD. The net debt is £350 million now, but it will be down because the gross debt will be down to half what it was under the GSD. It'll be down to £260 million or thereabouts or less. The net debt will obviously be less than that.
It was a quick figure.
And credit finance will not be used in any way to flatter the government's finances.
Look, this is the political sleight of hand of the government. What it intends to do is reduce public debt by transferring government debentures into the Gibraltar Savings Bank, and then credit finance, there's £400 million in credit finance, of which the government has already used £81 million, partly for commutation of pensions, partly to allow loans to people in order to pay government arrears, including loans to allow people to pay their taxes, and also this loan to the Sun Board. That is expenditure that the government would have had to expend.
Not a chance.
That is absolutely true.
Okay.
What it is hidden form
let me re-ask the question.
And it's very, very dangerous.
Okay, Mr. Feetham, you've made your point. Mr. Picardo, I'm sure, could argue this for a long while. Can I ask you both, will you come back in early 2015 to discuss public finances?
Public finances is the subject I most enjoy debating with Daniel Feetham, because
So that's
I know
a yes.
I'm absolutely right. So the sooner
Mr.
the
Feetham,
better.
will you come
Absolutely,
back?
and it's an important issue that really requires
we will have to leave it there.
more time than what we've had.
We will have to, yes, well, we've had 90 minutes. It's an extended viewpoint. We've done our best to fit in
Are we in
a
extra
lot.
time?
Yes, we are effectively in extra time. I'm very sorry we haven't been able to put your questions to the Chief Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. We'll ask them for some final remarks. Quite a few questions have come in to the effect that the poll could be read in such a way that there is a majority of Gibraltarian voters that doesn't know how they're going to vote at the next election. And that perhaps, we need to elevate the level of debate to make sure that you haven't been too bad tonight, in fairness, but there is a lot of bickering. You happily call each other liars here.
No.
You wouldn't do so, in Parliament.
No.
But can you reassure, everybody who's watching at home that over the next few months, whenever it is, however long we have before the next election, that you'll do your utmost with, sort of positive politics to try and convince them that yours is the right party or yours?
It's a development of the point I made, I think, when we started. The torch has passed to a new generation of Gibraltarians, a new generation of politicians. We saw Bolzano versus Caruana and how intense that could get. I think it's our responsibility to ensure we don't go down to that level. We often say that you play the ball, not the man, etc. You play the man, not the ball. I'm prepared to say to Danny tonight on this programme, as from tonight, forget who started or who didn't. We just debate the issues. Our press releases address the issues, and we just address the issues. And you stop calling me a liar, and I stop using the same sort of nomenclature that we use towards each other. We bring the debate back onto an even keel. That's my
exactly
offer to him.
where I wanted to end the programme.
That's my offer to him.
Mr. Feetham?
Look, I couldn't agree
yes
more.
Or no?
I couldn't agree more with the sentiment that what we've got to do is progress. We carry the torch, and we've got to move on to
elevate the discourse.
Absolutely, and we try, because our press releases are not personalised press releases. But of course,
Let's look
forward with positivity.
But look, positivity is one thing. But if you have a situation where somebody has told you at the last election that the public finances of Gibraltar were virtually bankrupt, with a ruinous state, that we were addicted to debt, when the debt today is exactly the same if it's government debt, but you then have this 400 million in credit finance.
That is not
and
debt.
The government is spending money as if there is no tomorrow. Well, look, I have a responsibility to point that out,
But can't you do it without calling me names?
But I don't call you names.
Okay,
you were the one that called me a liar yesterday.
Yeah, let's end this, because as from tomorrow, there's going to be
in a broadcast,
new
you
dawn
will he accept the offer?
of optimism and respect.
Will you accept the offer that I've made to sit down?
Don't call each other names.
Absolutely. Right. And also, will you accept my offer, which has been on the table for the last 2 years, of meeting in order to discuss a joint approach to our relations to Spain?
We've met on a number of occasions.
Gents,
and as you know, the Chief Minister's
thank you
consultative
ever so
council
much
will
for
be
your time.
incorporated soon.
Perfect
We'll be
place to
able to sit
finish.
around the table.
Viewpoint is back next week.
Mommy will be very happy with a new photograph.
Thank you ever so much, gentlemen. Thank you for your time.